Larry was only 8 when he first realized the world could break quietly. There was no storm that night, no raised voices in the kitchen, no shattered glass to mark the end of a family. Instead, it was the silence that struck him. The silence of two people who no longer looked at each other the same way. The silence of love slowly folding into something unrecognizable. He remembered sitting at the dining table, tracing circles on his plate with a fork as his mother and father exchanged carefully measured words. They weren't fighting anymore, and somehow that was worse, because even at 8, Larry could feel that the absence of conflict did not mean peace. It meant distance. When the announcement came, "We're going to live in different homes," Larry's world tilted. He nodded quietly like he understood, but he didn't. How could a child understand that two people who promised forever were now rewriting that promise into separate chapters? And here's the thing, Larry is not just one boy. He's millions. Every year, countless children across the world grow up with parents who part ways. And while the circumstances may differ, the inner world of a child navigating divorce often shares patterns. Emotional echoes, hidden questions, silent struggles. The psychology of a divorced parent's child is not a simple story of brokenness. It's far more complex, layered with resilience, confusion, longing, and an unshakable search for belonging. Psychologists have long studied the impact of divorce on children, and the findings are profound. On average, children of divorced parents are more likely to experience feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and divided loyalty. But statistics alone cannot capture the trembling heartbeat of a child like Larry, lying awake at night, wondering if he will have to choose sides, or whether love itself has an expiration date. Let's step into Larry's shoes for a moment. Imagine him packing his school bag on a Friday evening, knowing he'll spend the weekend at his father's house. Inside that small backpack, there's more than homework and a toothbrush. There's the invisible weight of two worlds that don't quite touch. He wonders, should I tell Dad that Mum got me a new sweater? Should I tell Mum that Dad made my favorite pancakes? Even at such a young age, he's already learning to edit himself, to filter his joy so it doesn't become someone else's pain. This silent negotiation inside a child's mind is what psychologists call loyalty conflict. It's the tug-of-war between wanting to love both parents freely and fearing that showing affection to one might hurt the other. And the truth is, children rarely put these feelings into words. Instead, they carry them quietly, like a secret weight pressing against their small shoulders. Larry grew older. By 12, he became skilled at reading the emotional weather in each home. At his mother's house, he learned to tread lightly, not to mention his father unless the moment felt safe. At his father's place, he sometimes exaggerated how well he was doing in school, hoping it would make up for the guilt his dad seemed to carry for not being there every day. And here's where the psychology deepens. Studies show that children of divorce often develop heightened sensitivity to emotional cues. They become watchers, listeners, interpreters of sighs and silences. While this can make them more empathetic and emotionally intelligent in the long run, it can also plant seeds of hypervigilance. Imagine growing up with the belief that peace is fragile, that love is conditional, that stability can vanish overnight. It shapes not just how you see your parents, but how you come to see yourself. But here's the paradox. Many children of divorce also grow into remarkably resilient adults. Why? Because the cracks in their childhood forced them to develop adaptability. They learn how to navigate complexity, how to juggle different realities, how to hold contradictions without breaking. Larry, for example, became the kind of teenager who could comfort a friend with uncanny wisdom because he knew firsthand what it felt like to hold unspoken pain. Still, resilience doesn't erase the questions that linger. Children like Larry often wrestle with the idea of permanence in relationships. They may wonder, if my parents couldn't make it, will I ever find something that lasts? These questions don't always show up immediately. Sometimes they wait, dormant, until young adulthood, when Larry sits across from someone he loves and feels a sudden fear of repeating history. And yet, this is where psychology offers hope. Research shows that awareness can break cycles. Children who grow up in divorced homes are not destined to repeat the same patterns. In fact, many of them, Once they process and understand their past, become deeply committed to creating stable, healthy relationships of their own. They know the value of communication, they know the cost of silence, and they know that love to survive must be nurtured, not assumed. But let's not move too fast. Let's go back to Larry as a child, because this is where the story of psychology truly begins. He often wondered, did I cause this? That's another common pattern. Children blaming themselves. Developmental psychologists note that younger children, especially those under the age of 10, often internalize divorce as something they somehow triggered. Maybe it was because they misbehaved, maybe because they fought with their siblings, maybe because they weren't good enough. These thoughts are rarely logical, but they are painfully real. Larry carried this question quietly for years until one day, as a teenager, he admitted it to a school counselor. The counselor explained something simple yet profound. You didn't break your family. You were caught in a change you couldn't control. That moment stayed with Larry, because sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from someone naming the truth you couldn't name yourself. Here's what makes this topic so universally human. You don't need to be a child of divorce to understand it. All of us, in some way, have felt the sting of separation, whether it's the loss of a friendship, the fading of a dream, or the drifting of people we once held close. Larry's story is a mirror. It shows us how deeply children long for connection, and how fragile they feel when that connection is threatened. At the heart of this psychology lies a paradox. Children of divorce are both wounded and wise. They know instability, yet they crave stability with an intensity others might not. They may grow up cautious, but that very caution can fuel deeper understanding of what makes relationships work. And isn't that, in some way, the story of all of us? We are shaped not only by the love we receive, but also by the love we lose. Larry's nights were sometimes heavy. He would lie in bed at his father's house, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his mother missed him. Then he would return to his mother's place and wonder if his father felt lonely without him. This quiet sense of being split in two, of belonging everywhere and nowhere, is one of the most profound psychological burdens a child of divorce can carry. And yet, it can also become the seed of empathy, teaching them to imagine the inner lives of others. Psychology tells us that children like Larry often become bridge builders. They learn to connect worlds that don't naturally align. They know how to soften conversations, how to smooth over rough edges, how to make peace where peace is fragile. It's both a gift and a weight, because while it makes them compassionate, it can also make them afraid of conflict, always trying to prevent the next rupture. But what if I told you this very tendency, the longing to bridge divides, can be transformed? What if, instead of being just a scar, it could become a source of strength? Here's where the story deepens, because while divorce marks a child, it does not define them. The psychology of a divorced parent's child is not a prophecy of brokenness. It's an invitation to resilience, to reflection, to rewriting the narrative of what love means. And that brings us back to Larry. By the time he reached adulthood, he carried both wounds and wisdom. He had trust issues, yes, but he also had insight. He sometimes feared abandonment, yes, but he also understood the preciousness of presence. And above all, he carried a quiet determination. If love is fragile, then I will treat it as precious, not disposable. This is where the real story begins, because the psychology of children like Larry isn't just about what they endure. It's about what they create out of that endurance. Larry once said something quietly to a friend, almost as if he was afraid of the words themselves. I feel like I belong everywhere and nowhere. That sentence captures the essence of many children of divorced parents. They are children of two homes, yet sometimes it feels like they are children of none, always packing, always moving, always balancing. And while most adults see this as a logistical matter, drop-offs, pickups, schedules, for the child, it is something far more symbolic. Home itself becomes a shifting concept. Psychologists call this dual identity strain. It is the tension of adapting to two environments with different rules, different moods, sometimes even different values. Larry's father was strict about bedtime. His mother was more lenient. His father loved sports. His mother encouraged reading. To survive, Larry became a chameleon, learning to adjust quickly. On the surface, this made him flexible, but inside he sometimes wondered, who am I really? Which version of me is the true one? This search for identity is one of the deepest psychological threads woven into the story of a divorced child, because when stability is divided, the self can feel divided too. Yet here's the fascinating part. Many children through this very struggle develop a strong, unique identity as they grow older. They learn to combine the lessons of both worlds, to draw strength from contrast. Think about it, a child who sees two different perspectives on life, two ways of loving, two approaches to problems, develops a wider lens. Larry learned discipline from his father and compassion from his mother. At first it felt like contradiction. Later it became integration, and that integration shaped his adulthood. But it wasn't always easy. There were years when Larry feared relationships altogether. He noticed how quickly small arguments between partners reminded him of his parents' quiet drift apart. He sometimes left connections early, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. His psychology carried a subtle whisper, better to leave before they leave you. This too is common. Studies show that children of divorced parents are slightly more likely to fear commitment or struggle with trust in early adulthood. It's not that they don't want love, it's that they have seen how fragile it can be. Yet, as Larry would eventually learn, fragility does not mean futility. A glass may be fragile, but it can still hold water. Love may be vulnerable, but it can still endure when nurtured with awareness. So what does awareness look like? For Larry, it began with noticing patterns. He realized he was always waiting for rejection, always testing people's patience to see if they would stay. When he understood this, he began to shift. He realized that trust is not about guarantees. It is about choosing vulnerability, even when the outcome is uncertain. This is where psychology becomes philosophy. The child of divorce who has seen promises break often becomes the adult who learns to honor promises more deeply. But let's widen the lens. Beyond Larry, what does research truly say about these children? Psychologists have identified both risk factors and strengths. On the risk side, children of divorced parents may experience lower academic performance in the short term, higher chances of anxiety or self-doubt, and more difficulty forming stable attachments. But on the strength side, they often develop remarkable empathy, problem-solving skills, and adaptability. Many even describe them as old souls because they learn early that life is not black and white. Here's something powerful to consider. Resilience does not grow in comfort. It grows in the cracks, in the places where life challenges us to adapt. Larry's cracks taught him to listen deeply to others, to notice when someone was hurting even when they stayed silent. His own silence as a child had trained him to hear what was not being said. And yet, empathy alone wasn't enough. There came a time when Larry had to face his own inner child, the boy who still wondered if he was somehow to blame. Therapy helped, honest conversations helped, but most of all, time helped. Because as the years went on, Larry discovered a truth that slowly dissolved his guilt. Divorce was not the story of him. It was the story of two adults navigating their own imperfections. He was not the cause, he was the witness. This realization is critical. Children who carry guilt often grow into adults who overcompensate, always trying to fix, to please, to prevent conflict at any cost. But when they finally understand that they were never responsible for the choices of their parents, they find freedom. And freedom gives birth to authenticity. Larry eventually fell in love. And yes, the old fears resurfaced. He worried about repeating history, about promises fading into silence. But this time he did something different. Instead of hiding his fears, he spoke them. He told his partner about the nights he spent moving between homes, about the loyalty conflicts, about the questions he still carried, and something beautiful happened. Instead of leaving, his partner listened. And in that listening, a new pattern began. That is perhaps the deepest gift children of divorce can offer the world: honesty. They know the cost of silence, so they learn the value of speaking truths. They know the weight of unresolved loops, so they become storytellers who seek closure. In a way, they embody what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where hardship, instead of breaking someone, deepens their capacity for meaning, connection, and purpose. Let's return one last time to the image of Larry as a child, lying in bed, wondering if love lasts. That question never fully disappears, but maybe it transforms. Maybe the question shifts from "does love last forever?" to "can I love fully while it lasts?" And isn't that, in a way, the question for all of us? Whether our parents stayed together or not, whether our lives unfolded smoothly or with fractures, we all carry the longing to be loved and the fear of losing it. Larry's story is the story of fragility becoming wisdom. It teaches us that a child of divorce is not defined by brokenness, but by the depth of their understanding. Yes, they may wrestle with doubts. Yes, they may carry scars. But those very scars can become maps, guides toward empathy, toward commitment, toward building the kind of relationships they once feared might not exist. And maybe that's the secret gift hidden inside the pain. Children of divorce often grow into adults who understand something profound. Love is not guaranteed, but that's what makes it sacred. Stability is not promised, but that's what makes it worth protecting. When they choose to love, they do so with eyes wide open, not out of naive certainty, but out of conscious devotion. So when you think of Larry, don't just picture the boy at the dinner table, confused by silence. Picture the man he became, the one who knows how precious presence is, who listens deeply, who commits not because it's easy, but because he knows what it means when commitment fades. The psychology of a divorced parent's child is not a tragedy. It's a lesson written in human hearts. It tells us that out of division can come unity, out of fragility can come strength, out of silence can come a voice. And maybe, just maybe, children like Larry remind all of us of the truth we sometimes forget. Love is not about perfection. It's about choosing again and again, even when it's fragile, especially when it's fragile.